I had a pretty low-key beach wedding, mostly just family and friends. My wife, who I'll just call Mary, invited more people than me for sure. She even invited her ex-boyfriend Tony. I didn't know exactly how I felt about that at the time, but I acted accepting and fine with it because I knew they remained close friends. There were about 50 people at the wedding ceremony, including Tony. I didn't pay him much mind the day of the wedding because it was such a big day and my mind was obviously racing. Tony was friendly to me, but throughout the wedding reception, I noticed Tony would constantly be talking to Mary, and when he wasn't talking to her, he'd be looking in her general direction. I mean, Mary and I were married now, it's not like he had any shot at all. So at the time, I started to think maybe I was just being a little too paranoid. Even if it was slightly annoying, Tony came alone to the wedding, which I thought was just a tad weird that he didn't bring a date. My wife and I stayed in a fancy waterfront hotel that night, and the next day we went back home. A couple of people who didn't make the wedding came by the house to congratulate us and drop off gifts. Surprisingly, Tony stopped by as well. Mary and I had recently moved into a new house together, and Tony claimed to have stopped by to check out her new place and to drop off his gift that he didn't get to give us yesterday. He handed us, well, Mary specifically, an envelope and a little foot-long teddy bear holding a heart. On the heart were our initials, which I actually found to be a nice, thoughtful gift. We gave Tony a tour of the house and he stayed for a beer, but after that, he said he'd better get going and congratulated us once more before leaving. Inside the envelope was a card containing $100. As nice as I thought the gifts were, I still believed he had some serious feelings for Mary, and I asked her to ease back on the friendship a bit. She couldn't see what I saw though, apparently. She swore up and down that they were just very close friends and that there were no feelings left on either side. Mary put the teddy bear next to some of the other gifts on our dressers. While my wife and I were in bed together having a romantic moment, I stopped her when I heard this weird noise. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but it sounded like a small electrical component. I looked around for my phone and found it was on my nightstand. I chalked it up to being a vibration from a text notification. Like half an hour later, laying in bed with the light off, I once again brought up Tony, asking if he'd texted her since the day before. She said he has, and I got a little annoyed. I repeated myself, saying I don't want her talking to him anymore. She got a little mad at me for accusing her of being interested in him at all. I assured her he was still interested in her. Why else would he stick around in his ex's life like this? She got back at me with her assurance that she doesn't view him romantically at all, that she's no longer attracted to him, and that she broke up with him for a reason. She followed this with she will ease back on her contact with him. I apologized for coming at her like that, and we went to sleep. The next day, when I got home from work, Mary exclaimed that Tony randomly blocked her on Facebook. When she texted him asking what's wrong, he replied, "What do you care? I heard the things you said." When she tried texting back, asking what he was talking about, she saw that he blocked her number now too. I wondered if maybe she butt dialed him on her phone while we had that conversation the previous night, but when she checked her call history, his name wasn't there. I wasn't angry though him blocking her meant I was right that he did still have feelings, and now he'd be gone. That night, while in bed, we talked about it some more. Then I heard the little electronic vibrating sound again. I looked at the teddy bear on the dresser, then I got up and went to pick it up, and my heart dropped. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to tear the bear open. Mary realized it immediately too. The inside of the bear's head was a square electrical component wired to what was very obviously a camera behind the left eye and a microphone box wired to the left ear. This was connected to some kind of Bluetooth device that would probably allow a phone to send and receive data. We went to the police that night with the teddy bear and filed a police report. We then hired a lawyer and pressed charges against Tony for invasion of privacy. The judge ruled in our favor and required Tony to pay us $15,000 each. Mary also got a restraining order against him, and that was the end of him in our lives. Though we still do sometimes worry that he may pay us an unexpected visit. If he was crazy enough to wire a teddy bear to spy on us and possibly watch us in bed together, who knows how far someone like that is capable of going. One of my close friends, Tom, was a really nice guy, super personable, and a really amazing friend. Everyone who met him loved him. His literal only flaw was the fact that he smoked heavily, like very heavily, at least a pack and a half a day. He was overweight and everyone was worried about him, that he would die early from lung cancer, and being overweight wasn't helping his chances. But he never listened to us. He was one of those guys that actually enjoyed smoking and how it made him feel. He'd always say, "Come on, guys, just let me live my life. I don't want to quit." It made me and the rest of his friends sad that he didn't value his life like we did. None of us wanted to lose him, sure, but we also wanted to see him succeed and have a family of his own one day. The event that occurred that has me writing this happened on a cold winter night in December. One of our mutual friends, M.O., was getting married, and of course, he invited Tom. He was always the life of the party wherever he went, since everyone knew and loved him so much. The only thing about this party was there was a very strict no smoking rule, as children would be in attendance and the other guests expressed not wanting to be in a cloud of smoke during this amazing day. Tom told me that he really wanted to go to the wedding and reception, but he was nervous that he wouldn't be able to last that long without a smoke and would feel embarrassed to leave because everyone would know what he was leaving to go do. Part of me was relieved to hear him say that because being embarrassed by smoking meant that maybe Tom had begun to dislike his smoking habit. It gave me hope that maybe one day soon he would quit. I tried to reassure him that everything would be okay, and worse comes to worse, he could sneak away for a quick smoke and be back before anyone noticed. I was trying to be supportive and not enabling, but I also know someone with a pack and a half a day habit isn't going to be able to last hours without getting nicotine withdrawals that would make his life just absolute torture. Tom snuck out a few times during the ceremony for a quick smoke, and it didn't seem to bother anyone. I felt for him. I was addicted to smoking for so long, and I knew how hard it was to quit or to try and go without them for a while. Things would change at the reception, though. It was being held at Vi's house, and it was in a very cramped part of town. Vi lived in a townhouse, and there was nowhere Tom could really go to sneakily have his cigarettes. He came to me, sweaty and worried, and told me that he was just going to have to leave if he didn't find somewhere to have a smoke. I didn't really know how to help him or what to say, but I did tell him this day was important and to find a way to stay and support his friend. He nodded, and then I watched as he walked out the front door. I had no idea that that would be the last time I or anyone else would see him alive. What I tell you next is what the police hypothesized happened to Tom. Tom exited Vi's house and turned right down the street. He walked about 100 feet where he found a small alleyway between two townhouses blocked by a gate. He must have thought that it would be a perfect place to have a smoke where no one at the reception would see him, so he pried open the gate and very carefully squeezed himself between the two buildings and closed the gate behind him to ensure that no one could see him. He stood with his back against one of the buildings as he wasn't quite small enough to fit facing the gate. The space was just that small. He then took out his pack of cigarettes, slid one out, and lit it, placing it between his lips. Sometime during the process, Tom managed to drop his pack of cigarettes. Without thinking, he bent over to retrieve them. As he bent down, he became wedged between the walls of the two buildings. He was stuck with the top portion of his body almost upside down since he was bending down to reach for his pack of cigarettes. In his position, his chest was pressing against his legs as he slid further down the wall toward the ground, only becoming more and more stuck with each passing minute. It's said that even if he wanted to call out for help, there's no way that he could have with his chest being restricted while in the position he then found himself in. Eventually, his cigarette escaped from between his lips, fell onto one of his legs, and burnt a hole in his pants. It didn't take long for Tom to suffocate to death with his weight crushing his own lungs. It became impossible for him to take a breath. He told no one where he was going, and everyone at the reception, including myself, just assumed that he had left without saying goodbye. It was out of character, but sometimes people just act out of character. Tom was capable of taking care of himself, and he wasn't the person people usually worried about. He was just one of those guys that seemed to have the best luck. After a few days of no one hearing anything from Tom, I called the police. A search was conducted near Vi's house, as that was the last place he was seen, and his body was eventually found in that same position in that small alleyway. He had almost completely frozen from being out in the cold for almost 3 days and nights, and it was a big ordeal trying to get him out. His mom was called to identify the body even though we all knew it had to be him. We were horrified, of course, and mourning Tom was one of the hardest things any of us had ever had to do. We expected smoking to maybe kill him one day, sure, but not in the way that it had. The guilt I carry is extreme. I should have told him that it was okay for him to go home if he was having a hard time, and it would have saved his life. His funeral was packed with all the people who loved him. We shared stories about his life and how great of a person he was. I just still can't help but think maybe he'd still be here if we never shamed him so much for smoking. My wife and I got married in the Church of the Hofskirkja in Iceland in 2015. We invited all of our close friends and family, including the family that neither of us really liked because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife Mika has this estranged aunt, Lucy, that no one in her family is really close with. She used to have serious drug problems, which spiraled her down a path that led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Well, Aunt Lucy was invited to the wedding, and when she showed up, she surprisingly came with a date. But unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you want to bring home to mom and dad. Right from the first time I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony, of course, came picture time. The bridesmaids, groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to this nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family from both sides came along as well to watch, while most others went to the party hall. Lucy and her boyfriend came to watch us take pictures as well. This was when I first got his name Tom. The two of them were making everyone uncomfortable. Like, everyone in the bridal party would joke around and we genuinely laughed, then either Lucy or Tom would yell out these weird, inappropriate things. They just kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences, and all of us were just internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward very quickly, to the point I wanted them to leave altogether. Anyway, we eventually finished with pictures and migrated to the party hall connected to the church where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention is on you at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts or even eat. Every second, I had someone else coming up to congratulate me, and eventually that person was Tom. He shook my hand again, his breath terrible and his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, rather a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to just be polite, and eventually, he walked back to Lucy. This was the last time I saw him that day. Eventually, I saw Lucy sitting by herself at the table, so I asked Mika where that Tom guy went. She had no idea either. After a while of Lucy sitting by herself, Mika went up to her to ask her where her date was. Lucy didn't know she hadn't seen him in an hour. Lucy also explained that they met in rehab and that she had only gone out with him 2 times. Mika grew concerned with this man being here after hearing this. We asked our parents and some close family to look around for the man to confirm if he was still there or not. There was some concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were being stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Tom and had an employee ask over the microphone for everybody to keep an eye out for Tom. Lucy wanted to call his cell, but she couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Lucy giving information about Tom. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after-party of sorts. Lucy texted Mika asking for our home address because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Mika responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Lucy's phone number. Mika turned off the music and put it on speakerphone. There was a male's breathing on the other end, horror movie-like, as if he was trying to creep us out. Mika kept asking where Lucy was to no avail. Eventually, the person on the other end hung up. Mika called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Lucy to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Lucy was staying with her for the night. Lucy got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding and didn't know her Apple ID or password, so she couldn't even track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was that Tom guy. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so, and the next morning, he woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept tapping on different windows of the house as if to be messing with them. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Tom, who we suspected was the one behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in, and given that Lucy's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Lucy told us that she and Tom had gotten into a verbal argument, and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him and, in his words, we sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Tom guy again, and we have only started to further distance ourselves from Lucy after that. I'm what you would call a serial bridesmaid. Like the saying, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, that's basically my life. I guess I'm the woman that attends a lot of other people's weddings but never has one of her own. Anyways, when my friend originally asked me to be one of her bridesmaids, I happily agreed. Her wedding would be about 10 months from when she asked, and I wasn't too happy about the way I looked. I made it my mission to lose weight before the wedding so I could feel good in my dress. I don't think my friend actually took me seriously though, because even though I told her to wait, she ordered my dress in a larger size. About a month before the wedding, all the bridesmaids were asked to go in to try on our dresses. Given that I had lost around 80 pounds by that point, my dress was no longer in the size I needed. My measurements were taken, and I was assured the dress would be tailored perfectly to fit me at my new size and be ready for the wedding. I was ecstatic. I was so excited for everyone to see how good I looked in this dress. The day before the wedding, I picked up the dress and hung it up in the closet overnight. I was smiling as I fell asleep. I was so happy for once in my life to be wearing a dress that I knew I looked good in, and I worked so hard to get there. The next morning, I grabbed my dress from the closet and made my way to the wedding venue. We had all made plans to get ready together at the venue. We all put on our dresses, and when I looked in the mirror, I was in awe of the person standing in front of me. I looked incredible. I finally felt confident in my own skin, and that was something I hadn't felt in years. The only problem was the dress was super tight, and the lace on the legs was actually really uncomfortable. It felt like I was being poked at my legs, but I was so happy for my friend and so happy with the way that I looked that I tried my absolute best to ignore it. Throughout the ceremony, the itching and even pain just kept getting worse. It was most annoying when I would walk, but even standing still or just sitting didn't give me relief. After the ceremony, one of my friends noticed little spots of blood seeping from the bottom of my dress. I was concerned and was done with the pain, so I decided to change clothes before the reception. When I slid the dress off over my legs, I noticed my calves were covered in small dots of blood, almost like little puncture wounds that hurt to touch. I just assumed that it was because they were fresh cuts that needed to heal. I searched the dress for any possible pins left behind but found none, so I just assumed that it really was the lace that had cut up my legs like I originally thought. I changed into some shorts and hoped that I wouldn't have any more problems for the rest of the night. That wasn't the case though. Every step was painful, and every small movement I made in my legs hurt. By the end of the night, I was on the verge of tears and could barely even walk. One of my close guy friends had to carry me to his car and drive me home. The next day, I made an appointment to see my doctor. Unfortunately, they had no available slots open until the next week, and it would be 5 days until they could get me in. This was a problem. By this point, I could no longer stand. I knew that I'd be bedridden or at best able to walk only 5 feet to the bathroom or 5 feet to the front door. I considered going to the hospital, but I figured that I'd suck it up and deal with the pain until I could see my family doctor. I lived in a studio apartment at the time, so everything was within about 15 feet. For the next 5 days, I limped around my apartment in severe pain. It was horrible. It felt like someone was shoving knives into my calves with each step that I took. Finally, when it was time to see my doctor, he didn't tell me to get X-rays like I was hoping. Instead, he told me that it was most likely arthritis and prescribed me multiple medications, one being for pain. The pain meds helped a little bit. I was able to walk 20 feet before feeling the pain and needing to rest, but to me, that was better than nothing. For the next year, I worked from home. I completely lost my social life, and my friends visited me less and less because all I did was complain about the pain I was in. No matter how many doctors I went to and told about the pain, none would schedule me for an X-ray. I became increasingly concerned about the arthritis medication I was taking when I realized nothing had actually been done to confirm that diagnosis. I continued the pain meds but stopped the others. I'd actually gotten to a point where I didn't even want to live anymore. I almost wished that they would just amputate my legs so I would never have to feel this way again. I missed the life I used to live and the friends I used to have. For a year, I hadn't felt like myself, and I was done letting doctors tell me what was happening to me wasn't serious. I made an appointment to see another doctor, probably the 20th that year, and I made a deal with myself that I would demand that he send me for some type of diagnostics or x-rays. I didn't really know, but he did just that. I was scheduled to get an x-ray of my legs the next day, and that was the first day I smiled in a very long time. The day of the x-rays, I made my way out of the house with my cane and took a cab to the office. I laid there as they took images of my legs. Of course, the technicians can tell you nothing, so I had to wait for the next day to find out what was actually wrong with me, if the x-ray even said anything at all. The look on my doctor's face when he pulled up those images was priceless. He was shocked and horrified all in one, and the look on my face probably matched his. I finally saw what was wrong with me. In my legs were multiple 2 to 3 inch sewing needles shoved into my calf muscle. I had 4 in my left calf and 7 in my right. It turns out the seamstress who worked on my bridesmaid's dress a year before had used sewing needles to keep the fabric together when sewing, instead of regular pins, and had subsequently forgotten to take them out. On the day of the wedding, I had walked, sat, and stood in the dress, and in doing so, the needles were pushed further and further into my legs until I could no longer see them once the dress was finally taken off. I had been walking around with needles in my legs, doing damage to the nerves and muscle, for a whole year, and nobody believed me. Finally, I was validated. Surgery was scheduled for a few days later, as they now considered it emergent. I stayed in the hospital for a couple of days after to make sure that I wouldn't get an infection, and now, 3 years later, I am almost completely recovered. I still get minimal nerve pain, but it's nowhere near as bad as the pain I felt that year.